Welcome to the ROCA Podcast.
Welcome to our second episode of the ROCA Podcast. Today we have Mr. Walter Clarke as our special guest. And today we will talk about athlete students and, about their life, if it's different, much different to non-athletic students. And welcome, Mr. Clarke.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your days in middle school and high school and how being a student athlete was for you when you were in school?
All right. Well, the first school sport I played was baseball. And I started off doing that in middle school. And when in middle school in my country, in America, is from grades 6 through 8. So the very first real student athlete experience was when I got to grade 8. I was able to play on the JV team for my local high school. So what it required that I had to do would be to catch a bus after school each day. A bus would take us from the middle school to the high school. And we would get to the high school, and as middle school students, we would practice with the high school team. Then we would ride the high school activity bus back home. And I would usually get home very late. And so what it forced me to do was manage my studies and my time better, because I had considerably less time outside of school for anything but baseball and traveling to and from practice.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like the because you said you have a shortage of time, right? Did you ever feel like that was kind of overwhelming, or like did you sometimes had the thoughts of like, oh, what if I quit baseball, then I have better, more time for school, maybe even better grades and stuff like that?
Well, you know what? I have to say it never occurred to me. I did feel that middle school came quite easily for me. So it wasn't that hard to manage my academic responsibilities with sports because I was never really stressed out by academics. I did end up going to an honors high school where you had to test to get in after middle school, and they had no sporting teams. So what that did was for 2 years, it kind of took me outside of becoming a student athlete. So at that point, I then began playing for I played basketball at that point, and I played for a neighborhood club league. And we've practiced, not every day, but we practiced 3 days a week, and we had games on weekends. And once again, because it was 9th and 10th grade, there was a challenge of making sure I got my work done. But it wasn't a huge challenge at that point because a lot of my work I was able to get done at school. And then if I needed to work when I got home, I would. Now, after leaving, I left that school after 2 years because I wanted a more comprehensive high school experience. So I left that school. And once I left that school, I went to another high school, which was a normal school like you would see in your average American teen movie, and I.
Yeah.
So when I got there, I played, I ran cross country, which is 5Ks, and I also ran track. And that was practicing every day. It also meant practicing in the summer. And on weekends, we would go to different parts of the state for huge invitationals. So that definitely required me to be more focused on my schoolwork than I had been. But once again, I was a high school student. I didn't have much to do but sports and schoolwork. So I just did my schoolwork in my free time.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, though, that it's changed significantly, or maybe it's not changed at all compared to when you were in school and compared to now? And so we know you teach English and you coach basketball at ROCA. And so do you think in an IB environment, for example, it's a bit different because
it's
the workload's a bit different and the way stuff works is also a lot different?
Yeah, I think it's different in two respects. One, it's and we're I wasn't an IB student, and then two, we are all living as expats. So I think those two things actually add different variables to it. So if you look at being an IB student, a lot of our assessments are long-term assessments that we're required to work towards. So it's really important to budget our time wisely and be organized. And I actually think sports helps with that, because I think the less free time you have, the more efficient you are with what time you are allotted. So if I had tons of time unstructured, I would probably procrastinate. But because I'm busy with organized activities, I know exactly how much time I have, and it's easy to see when I'm falling behind if I were falling behind.
So that answers our question of if you think that athletic students have more discipline.
Yeah, they have to.
I think it would. Because I know as myself, like, so I play like cricket and rugby in the school, but I also used to play cricket like in the Abu Dhabi club, right? Which it kind of is like the main board in Abu Dhabi, so it's kind of like the Abu Dhabi state team, if you will. It's not really a state, it's an emirate. But like before I made it into that team, and I was just kind of like dilly-dallying with cricket, I wasn't like fully into it. Like even though I was like in the 8th and 9th grade, my grades were a lot lower than when I was like in the 10th. And then I started realizing, like, even though I'm doing cricket like 5 days a week, I've actually been spending more time on my schoolwork and like less messing around, because I think it's just the pressure when you realize you don't have as much time as you thought you did. And then you realize, okay, shit, maybe I do need to actually just work and get it done with rather than procrastinate.
Right, exactly. It makes your time more accountable and measurable. My grandmother used to say, "Idle hands are the devil's playground," and what that meant was the more time you have, the more opportunities you have to be non-productive. So if you know, okay, I'm practicing until 7 o'clock, 5 days a week. If I go to bed at 10 o'clock, that means I have from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock to eat dinner and work on whatever deadlines I have to meet. And so let's say you don't have practice and you just know that you get off school at 3 and you have 5 days a week from 3 to 10 o'clock to get any work done that you need to. You'll probably put it off and put it off and put it off until you absolutely have to. So that's
definitely.
Do you think that, you know, they're guaranteed to be more successful in life, those kind of athlete students?
I actually think so. I think so for a couple of reasons. Well, one is that when you play sports, first of all, you have to deal with adversity. And so you'll be able to handle pressure better. You'll be more organized, of course, because of what we talked about as far as the demands on your time. But I also think even more is that you'll be facing adversity with teammates. That's if you're playing team sports, you're facing adversity with a group of people. So you start building interpersonal skills and you can manage conflict resolution and being supportive and being supported by your teammates and coaches. So I think that's a very important skill, because when you play team sports, you have to deal with winning gracefully. You have to also deal with losing gracefully. You have to deal with supporting maybe a teammate who made a mistake that could have cost you a chance to win the game. So you learn a lot of, forgive the cliche, but you learn grace under fire. And grace is when you are diplomatic when you don't have to be. And so I think that's what sports teaches you.
So do you also think, like, you know, you could, I mean, we talked about the benefits right now. So do you think there's any like bad things that could happen? For example, I don't know, like maybe if you have athletic parents even and they stress you about, you know, let's say the cliche, like making the swimming team or, you know, being the quarterback, the best in the football team or whatever. Do you think that could have negative effects too?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I didn't think about that. But I think pressure in general, I think internal pressure is what we do within ourselves because we want to be great. But if you already have internal pressure and then you have external pressure as well, it can be crippling. Or maybe there's no internal pressure. Maybe you're playing a sport because you enjoy it and you just want to have fun, but there's somebody in your life who wants you to be great, even though that's not your aspiration. I think that could definitely be negative. Um, I think athletes need to also be taught how to find their voices where they can express their expectations for why they're playing a sport. I think coaches and parents need to work with athletes, student athletes, to support them better for why they're playing a sport.
Definitely. So
Yeah,
do you
and I
also
think
think like, yeah, you're going right.
I just want to like add on to that. Like I think the why you're playing the sport is a big issue because like I kind of struggled with that a year ago when I had to kind of stop playing cricket the way I was playing because I was playing essentially like 6 days a week with like training 4 days a week and then 2 games on the weekends. And then I realized like, okay, I may not be able to carry this on into like IBDP. And so then I did make the decision to stop playing. But like I like almost regretted it instantly and then I got back into it and like struggled for the first half of the year. But I still felt that the why you're playing is really important. And then sometimes as kids, we tend to lose sight of like whether it's actually realistic. Because at the end of the day, just because you play doesn't mean you're gonna make it, you know. And so like that area when you realize why you're playing and then when to draw the line of okay, like there's no point of me playing anymore because I kind of have to focus on my academics because I am not good enough to like make it big. I think coming to that realization and like a big decision as that when you're like 15, 16 could be a bit challenging sometimes. Like I know it was definitely challenging for me. And I think that maybe that whole experience overall could be like a character builder for student athletes. But yeah, essentially, just want to say that it
Yeah,
can make a difference why you're playing.
right. And I think, and so you've touched on something else, and maybe we go on a little bit of a tangent, but um, I think that with sports, because you got to think, I once heard a professional athlete say, I get paid a king's ransom to play a child's game. And so anybody who loves a sport that they're playing naturally may have the desire to become a professional at it because then you get to spend your life doing something that you would do for free anyway, and you'd be making huge sums of money. But I also think what we need to do with our student athletes is prepare them for life with sports after team sports or after school sports. So, for instance, let's say you don't go pro. There are opportunities to be community coaches. Maybe you would decide to study sports management. Those are ways that student athletes can take their love of the sport to the next level and can become professionals without having to be a professional athlete. Because in the scope of humanity, it's only a very small percentage of people who quote unquote make it or actually go on to become highly paid professional athletes. It's not unattainable. You can do it, but I think we should always have a plan B and C.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
So like, okay, like a bit of a different question or topic right now. I mean, still sports, but so you see in the movies like all the U.S. high schools having those crazy football pitches and those crazy gyms, and like, why do you think that the high schools in the United States are giving more like proper facilities than, for example, in this country? Like no offense to this country, of course, but like, I think you get my question, right?
Yeah, I got you. Just so I think that came to one of the other things I mentioned earlier is that we're living within an expat society and we are expatriates. So with regards here, first, this is a young country, so a lot of things are developing, but also the traditional sports environment takes a while to develop. And in America, they have a lot more structured sports and feeder programs and pipelines So it's a huge sports infrastructure there. So, for instance, I taught in a high school in Atlanta, Georgia once, and that high school had 5,000 students. And if you go to the basketball gym, the arena that we had, or the football stadium, it looked like something you would find at a major university. And that's because the team that we had for football won a lot. And the school was very new. And the region that I was living in, high school sports was huge because college and university sports were huge. And so because of that, I mean, I had students who I had in my classroom who ended up having very storied careers in the National Football League. So it's because the opportunities are there. And so when those opportunities are there, more money is put into that program. So the more that a school wins, let's say, for instance, if you have a school in America who perpetually finds themselves competing for a championship or a state title, they're going to have more communities and businesses acting as sponsors and forming partnerships, and they will then put money into the school's program. We do have some instances here. As you know, I coach, well, you may or may not know, but I coach a Talim basketball team and we travel. So one of the Talim schools that we practice at, one of the parents has a very profitable business dealing with precious metals. And so what they do is they sponsor the team. So they have put a new scoreboard in the school. They have also made sure to get kits for all of the athletes. And so little things like that's how you start building a program, is when the community believes in that team and they start to support it. And so you have more stable communities or more static communities in America because it's not an expat country.
Yeah.
Right.
Also,
I
I also think it's kind of a cultural thing, you know, like you know, all those
like over here they do have sport facilities all over. Like I think when you asked the question about like why there isn't as much development here for sports, I think they do, but it's nowhere near as diverse as probably in the
that's what I
US.
meant.
Because over here it's pretty much just football and like not even schools mostly, but it was more like clubs or like European or English clubs that have got like their youth programs set up here. Like I know a lot of my friends, they say they play for Man City, and it's like the Man City Youth Club based out of Abu Dhabi, right? And so I think in that sense, I guess the UAE is kind of facilitating sports through football, as in this is the rest of the world's football, not America's football. And but I think they think that they only need to do that one because it's the most popular, and like I'm in strong disagreement with that. Like I think there's a lot of other sports that the expat population of this country plays that's like thoroughly neglected, like rugby. Even though there's like the Dubai Sevens, you know, and like Dubai is just an hour and a half away from here. There's very little to no like rugby infrastructure at a grassroots level for schools in Abu Dhabi. You know, like
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't.
What I've given that thought as well, and what you said earlier, Oliver, about the culture of sports has reminded me. Now, also another reason why, especially in America anyway, sports are so huge, and it might be slightly different in Europe, but mainly it's because it's an opportunity for so many student athletes to change their lives and live better lives. So in America, if you do well enough in sports, you get to go to a university for free. And if it weren't for those sports, you might never get a chance to go to university. And I think the one thing about expat culture is most of the families here are professional families with credentials and certifications who already have the wherewithal and resources to, with or without sports, can make sure that their children have a decent start in life. But in America, there are a lot of people where without sports, they wouldn't have a chance. So therefore, you have a larger percent of the population where it's ball or nothing. So I also think that lends to how prominent it is within the culture. But you still have affluent kids who also desire to become professional athletes as well. But I think for some people, it's like the only way out, and you don't have that.
Also,
I think
it's
that's
like
a great point. And it's kind of over here too. Like I know BSAC, they actually give like I think they're the only school in Abu Dhabi that actually gives sports scholarships
Right, I've heard
to
about.
their the students. Like they've actually got scouts at games, and like I mean, a lot of people say it's unethical and it's like poaching players and stuff. And at the end of the day, you are technically poaching the other school's players or the other club's players. But if you're giving a kid like a scholarship that is quite substantial, I don't see a reason for that child or for that family to make the decision to switch schools. I don't see why they wouldn't do that because, I mean, at the end of the day, you're saving money that you could then maybe put into your college or whatever. And more importantly, it's actually getting a reward for your abilities. Like
And I think that's correct, but then I think also too you have to look at these programs and look at what your child will be learning. So I don't know if you're familiar with the old school movie The Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi was the very small dojo, one student, not a lot of money, but not only was he building a proper karate fighter, but he was also building a person as well. And then the main antagonist, the Cobra Khans or the Cobra Kais, they were win above all else. And so they had a culture of winning, but that was the only culture they had. And so there wasn't a lot of respect prevalent. So if I were in that situation where my kid was already in school, if I had the opportunity to save some money, I would consider it because that's a huge bonus for your family. But even more importantly, I would still have to look at the values that those coaches put forward. Because a lot of times when you play against certain teams, you can see by the overall demeanor of the team what kind of values that school and that coach puts forward.
like
And
being ignorant and snobs, kind of like thinking they're better. That kind of mentality, I think, too, right?
yeah,
yeah,
a lot,
definitely.
yeah, definitely thinking that they're better. That bit of elitism, and sometimes just the sportsmanship. Because sometimes because you have to think if a school is willing to pay money for a student to go there, which is there's nothing wrong with at all. I wish all schools did that. That would be great for the students. But if schools were doing that, if only one school does that, maybe that school is institutionally more competitive. And because they're investing money in that sport, it's more important institutionally that they win. And so sometimes you could possibly sacrifice sportsmanship and character for end results, which is taking a trophy home above all else. So as parents, we would have to look at those values that are being put forth because yes, it is good to be wanted and courted, but at the same time, you want to look at the finished product that your child could become as a result of being part of that program.
I
Definitely.
think that's a great point
like-
you brought up.
And like, okay, this is again that kind of stereotypical and cliche kind of thing, but in all those high school movies about America, you see those chads, those like football players or those huge people like muscular and big and whatever. Did you have experiences with that in your high school? Did you?
Yeah, it's not as I actually saw that more in university where it's like, okay, the football team runs the campus. But most of my high school experiences, I mean, my friends, everybody played sports for fun. It wasn't that, I don't know, I never really felt like, oh, there's that group of cool kids that I want to be a part of. I kind of befriended everybody. I mean, some people may have thought that way. But Yeah, you do have some people who excel more than others. So we've had, so one thing that you have in America is that phenomenon of the star athlete. And with that being said, sometimes those people who are athletic phenomenons, um, they struggle to be grounded because if you are very, very good at a sport, especially in my country, um, things will be handed to you. Things will be thrown at you, positive and negative. And one of the most difficult things that you would have to do is to be able to keep your focus and be goal oriented. I mean, you may have people, unscrupulous people, offering you money. You may have schools working really hard to get you to attend there. You'll have so many people pulling you in so many different directions. And you'll be used to being like a celebrity from the time that you started playing that sport, that it can be a lot for a young person to deal with. So that's why when I look at athletes like LeBron James and Serena Williams, who've been superstar athletes for, since they were teenagers, they've managed to be successful and navigate those pressures successfully. But I know way many more cases of people who didn't make the right choices, and then there were no sports after high school for them, even though they're just as good as people that we see in magazines and on TV and social media today. So yeah, you do have those athletic specimen and star athletes, but a lot of times with great talent comes great pressure.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier about how, just a sec. You mentioned earlier, Mr. Walter, about how a lot of, like in your time at least, it was like pretty much everyone played mainly for fun. Now, do you think that's still the case, or do you think because of like the way sports has grown over the years, how it's become a lot more commercialized and a lot more competitive, that as kids grow older and they come into like the last few years of high school, I'm talking like 9, 10, 11, 12. Wait, that is high school, but like 10, 11, 12, they get more competitive and like they maybe lose their way a bit in like that whole goal of being the best or trying their hardest to be the best.
Well, I think
sorry, continue.
No worries. I don't think that it's necessarily a negative thing. I'll say that we're now living in the information age, and so who knows what I could have achieved athletically if I were a student athlete now versus back then, because now you all have access to so much more information. You can actually go look firsthand and see how professionals train. You can look firsthand and see what does it take. So I think that this generation is able to be more goal oriented with their participation. And I still think there are plenty of people who play for fun. And I think a lot of people who play for fun, they may have, I think just as many of us had pipe dreams of going pro as people do today. I just think that we didn't know how. So for instance, if I wanted to go pro, I would have to get accepted to a university, and hopefully it's a big enough university where some scouts would see me and there would be a chance that I would get noticed and possibly drafted. But now, even without going to a major university, you can play different leagues, pro and amateur leagues. You can create your own video mixtapes. You can market yourself. You can promote yourself, and you can circumvent all of the traditional routes to becoming a pro athlete. So I think the playing field is a lot more level now than it was in my time. But because of that, I think you might have a lot more people who make that their plan. And just like my generation did, eventually you find out whether or not it's for you or not. But what I think is great is that you at least can make that decision for yourself more so than just waiting for some mysterious benefactor to notice you and change your life.
Yeah, I agree with you that there's definitely a lot more opportunity now compared to like maybe even 10, 20, 30 years ago.
I mean, it's the same with, for example, like, making music, for example, like me, like back in the day, well, you either had to be, you know, played by a DJ, like your local DJ, and then you'd have to hope that someone heard you on the radio on that day, and then, you know, a label, I don't know, something there. But today you don't even need a label, you know, you can do everything yourself. And you know what I mean? Like, I think it's very similar.
Yeah, everybody has their own agency now these days. Agency, that means you can take your own fate within your hands, even though that's the opposite of what fate is. But you can control your outcome more so than you could have before. You can create your own lane. So I think it does result in more people choosing, but I think it also opens doors for more people to, I mean, if you shoot for the moon, I hate cliches, but you end up in the stars if you miss. Sorry. But
Yeah.
if you want to go pro and you end up as a coach, I mean, hey, if you end up as an agent, if you end up as a sports manager, I mean, there are opportunities. And so I think regardless, if you want your life to be involved in that way, there's nothing wrong with it. But I just think that you need to make sure you have multiple plans, because I mean, you can be a superstar phenom, but what if you blow your knee out? You still need a backup plan.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's another thing.
That's why many
Like-
athletes, you know, build like an image around them, kind of like you'd see, for example, Michael Jordan, you know, being the Jordan Jumpman, right? From
Right.
the famous Nike shoe, for example. So even if he stops playing sports, or even if, you know, he has some injury that, you know, doesn't allow him to play sports anymore, he's still set. Like, he doesn't actually need to do it anymore.
But I think that would be different for a student athlete. Like
Yeah.
I knew I had a really bad back injury just before, like, there were selections for Abu Dhabi, and I missed out essentially on like an entire year of playing, and I could have had a great head start there, because so I had like a swollen L5, which like would take around 6 to 8 months to like get good and then like build my strength up again and all that. And that happened when I was 15 and I was running for an under 19 side, you know. And so if I got in then, like I would be like 2 years younger than everyone else, or like younger than the next youngest person, and I'd have like quite a bit of time to get adapted to that like more professional environment and all that stuff. But like that didn't happen because of this, you know. And so there's like a lot of things that sometimes are not in the control of like the athlete and the student. And I think in order to like combat the fact that something might just happen where you can't play sports again, like you need to make sure you delegate time to things other than sports too.
Yeah. Now something that you said kind of made me think about this too, especially with student athletes and the next level. Something that LeBron James did, I thought was great, and not everybody is able to have this done for them, or have this opportunity given to them. But what LeBron James did with the guys, because his high school basketball team, those guys were his closest friends, and even though he didn't go to university, when he went into the NBA, he paid for his closest friends, who were also his teammates, to go to university. And those guys are all still working in sports now. So one guy is his business manager and handles all of his business dealings. Another guy has one of the most prominent sports agencies in the NBA and is branching into other sports. And one other guy, he's helped get his businesses off the ground as well. But because they were student athletes, they were fortunate enough to have played with an athlete who saw how important it was for them to have their own agency after playing sports. And so although none of them became professional athletes, they still are professional sports people, which I think was really great. And being student athletes is what opened those doors for them.
I think like any sport in general, you do end up building like a lot of camaraderie and friendship that do last a lifetime and like would result in situations such as the one you just described. And I think that's probably one of the real plus points of like playing a team sport and starting young.
Yeah, and it's also it's a sign of loyalty, I guess. Like you can't expect let's say for example LeBron James, becoming famous and rich and everything. Like not everyone would, pay the college tuition for his friends and support their work career. Many people would just just disappear from their lives and just think, and like back to the topic that we were at, like becoming kind of a snob and thinking and like doing like elitism and everything and thinking you're better. So yeah, that also shows that he actually practices real sportsmanship.
And that's, once again, I think that those are is to be said about, of course, the parents of these athletes. And once again, back to that thing, it's all about the culture that that coach creates. Because if you're on a team as a student athlete and everybody is supporting each other, like everybody can't be the star player on the team. But I'm willing to believe that he didn't mind supporting his players. I mean, these players, because they supported him when he was with them, that's different sometimes with scholarship sports, because with scholarship sports, everybody's fighting to prove their validity and justify their reason for being there. But if you're on a team with a good culture and climate, there becomes a brotherhood or a sisterhood, which allows these athletes to form bonds that last all their lives. And that's what I try to do as a coach, even in the expat community. One of the things that I love seeing most is when I see my players together around campus. And sometimes the things that hurt me the most is if I've ever seen my teammates, my players, being resentful of each other's successes or not supportive of each other's adversities and failures. I think that's what makes for these strong relationships after sports, is that you learn to support each other through good and bad during sports. And that comes in practice. And then on the field of play during game day, you're just carrying forth the culture from practice onto that pitch. So that's what I'm thinking. It's a testament to how that team of young men were groomed when they were in high school.
Yeah, definitely. I think we kind of take for granted sometimes the role of a coach. Like, they're not just there to teach you how to play or to make you play better. They really do end up shaping a large part of your character and your life into the future.
Yeah, it's not always easy, and you have to sometimes weigh winning over principle. And yeah, there have been times where I've had to bench maybe my best player to prove a point, where I know that if this person would have played, we would have stood a better chance of winning, but then I would have sent the wrong message. I mean, that's the thing. When you're taking students, you're not just teaching them the sport, you're teaching them life skills.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Okay.
All right. So now let's one final question, which is highly debatable.
Question.
All right.
American football or rugby?
Those are like the two kingpin of
Don't say anything wrong. Don't say anything wrong.
contact sports with a ball. There's no right or wrong answer, obviously, but for you as an American,
Obviously, I was kidding. Yeah.
in a very grew up obviously in like a American football environment. What is your take on like the two sports?
I'm learning, man. I'm actually learning more about rugby now. Like, I'd never. All right, so don't be insulted, but in my country, rugby is mainly played as a university sport by girls. So, so you have the guys playing with the pads, and then you have the girls playing rugby. It's tackle rugby though. But being here, and now my oldest son has played rugby for he's played for 2 seasons now, and he actually is getting good, and I'm actually learning the sport. So I do like the sport. I think they have some similarities and some differences. I do think because American football, you have pads those guys are able to use their bodies in a way that allows them to play with a bit of reckless abandon that's not necessarily always healthy for them. But you see rugby players too with broken collarbones and broken legs and missing teeth, just like American football players. I think it's just a little bit different. So I think with rugby, you do have to protect yourself a little bit more because you're not heavily padded. But technique is just as important in American football as well. I like them both. I think they both require a certain level of toughness and strategy. I wasn't allowed to play football. I mean, I played in the neighborhood, but my mom would always let me practice in preseason, but I would never get to, by the time the first game came around, she would always take me off the team because she was worried I would get hurt. So I definitely understand it, but I wish I would have played, but at the same time, when I see how people are getting hurt nowadays, I don't have a lot of regrets, but I'm glad that my sons are playing rugby right now.
I mean, in regards to the whole pads thing, like, so when I first played rugby when I joined Raha in 8th grade, and so like when I told my parents I was playing rugby, like they weren't very happy about it. Like they did say that like I can do what I want as long as I don't come home completely broken, but like I don't know, they like probably saw something about American football and they were like, well, why don't you play this? It looks so much safer because like there's like helmets and pads and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thing was though, like I actually had a friend of mine that played American football quite regularly and like with a club in Abu Dhabi too. And like every time I was talking to him, he always had like a black eye or a bruised forehead or something. I was like, why is it that your head is always bashed up? You know, because like I didn't really know how American football worked fully like that. And he told me like most of the tackles that take place in American football, there's a lot of head-on-head collision, and I think that would be like probably the main difference, like physicality-wise. Like in rugby, I've only got my head bashed up once, and that was like because of a foul committed by like the other player. Yeah. And so I think in terms of like head safety and like concussions and stuff, I'd say rugby is a bit safer. But in terms of like the rest of your body coming out alive, I'd go with American football. It's unique because obviously they're both equally dangerous. I mean, depending on who you ask, they will say they'll lean a bit more to one side or the other. But
Yeah,
I think
both had their pros and cons. Now, I mean,
Yeah.
you have to think though, in American football, they have those helmets on. And so you have that helmet on, which almost doubles the circumference of your head. You're gonna have head collisions. But then it's also the fact that you have that equipment on, it does allow you to play with a different type of abandon than you would play with rugby. So in American football, you see somebody running full speed and they may actually go airborne and dive to launch themselves into someone, where in rugby, you're going to probably have a different type of technique to get close and tackle without having such a violent collision.
yeah,
But it's not just the head though. The knees and ankles get messed up a lot in American football as well because there's no way to really fully
Protect it, like
protect those. And so people are flying at your knees at full speed, and people do tend to tackle with their head down. But there are movements within the sport over the last 10 years or so, and even more so recently, to teach youth football players not to lead with their head and teach them to play with their head up. Because in my generation, it was a tough guy thing to put your head down, and it was called head cracking. And and it showed a certain fearlessness because there weren't any diagnoses with regards to concussions. So
right. Like no, if we did that in rugby, like if you go in head first, you'd just be laughed at because you'd be eating the grass. Because like if someone runs in with me head first, I just have to like push their head down really. And that's
yeah, we
legal,
actually have a
because-
technique for that. You just run and like stretch your hand out. That's it.
Yeah, I think the flow between the two games is totally different. Like American football have entire like offensive and defensive teams, and like the play stops almost every time the ball is dropped or something like that. but like with rugby, it's a lot more continuous, I guess. So in that sense, there may be a little less contact in rugby, especially like sevens.
I do like that about it because you know what? A professional American football game is four.
Isn't it like 3 hours?
Yeah, it's like
4, yeah.
4 15-minute quarters. So technically, it's the clock. It's an hour's worth of time on the clock. It takes over 2 hours. It could take under 2 hours, or it can be as long as 3 hours, depending upon how the clock is managed. But if you actually just measure the amount of time that they were actually playing, it's about 15 minutes out of that hour.
Yeah.
A lot of it is stopping,
it.
ball setting up, so it's a different pace of play, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very strategic. I actually love watching it. Even though I coach basketball and that's the sport I've played the most, football is probably my favorite sport to watch.
Is it, like you said, because of the strategies and like the different plays, and like players can really get creative with how they, I guess, position themselves and pass the ball?
Yeah, and so something else that we didn't discuss though is there was always the stereotype of the dumb jock that you would see, especially in American culture. But actually, football is a very complex sport, and most athletes have to learn lots of technique, strategies, and plays in order to play their games effectively. And so I do think athletes are way more intelligent than people give them credit for.
Yeah, definitely. Like I always think that the misconception people have of like a sports person, like he's not spending any time in the classroom, he's always like out playing sports or whatever. I think that's always been flawed, because I think not just American football, but any sport, you require quite a fair bit of strategy. But yeah, I think overall sports I think it probably unlocks that critical thinking aspect in your mind, because you've got to think of creative ways to get out of certain situations that you may not get if you're stuck sitting in the library reading Hitler's invasion into Poland, right? So I think a certain amount of sport is definitely required.
Yeah, I definitely think that, and that's one thing I think the IB curriculum does well, is that it pushes the students to be balanced. And I think that balance in life can be one of the most significant determinants of success and fulfillment. So
yeah,
I think we need student athletes to make sure that our students are properly balanced and well-rounded, because I've known quite a few guys who carried briefcases to school and did nothing but sit in the library and study. And when you look and see them 10 years after high school and university, they aren't necessarily successful. They were just really good at school. But that being good at school doesn't always mean you're going to be good at life. And that goes with sports too. But if you can balance being a part of a team and being a student, I think that it does give you a greater chance at success in life.
Definitely.
Well, that was a nice talk we just had. Mr. Walter, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoy being a part of your podcast.
And well, yeah, we'll see us next episode.
All right.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.